And also, it does feel important to be raising awareness about therapy to the Black community as well, because we do know that Black people are overrepresented in the mental health care system, in psychiatric care. And a lot of therapists and professionals are working very hard at the moment to reverse that trend, which has been going on for a really long time. So next slide, please. Thank you. So I will introduce myself so you know who I am and you know who's talking to you today. So I'm Nicola Codner. That's a picture of me on the screen there. I'm a counsellor and psychological wellbeing practitioner. I've put my email on there, so do feel free to get in contact after the session if you've got any questions at all about counselling. I've got my number on there as well. Would just ask that I'm not contacted at any type of crisis situations, just sort of general queries about therapy. And if anybody's got any interest in my service as well, please do get in contact. So I will give you a little bit of information about my experience and why I became a counsellor. So I've been qualified as a counsellor now since 2015. I started working as a volunteer as a counsellor with survivors of sexual abuse, then moved on to being a bereavement counsellor. I did train as a play therapist, and then I've worked as a volunteer counsellor with children and teenagers as well. Now I work in my private practice. I'm only working with adults in my private practice, and all of my work is online. That's not just because of the pandemic, that's my preferred way of working, which will continue into the future. I do also work as a psychological wellbeing practitioner at the moment with the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. And what I'm doing there is working with children and young people and parents, offering support for low mood and anxiety. And the work that I'm doing there is CBT and mindfulness work, and then general support with wellbeing. So just to explain what drew me to this line of work, there were a lot of different reasons, but part of it is to do with my identity and to do with Black issues. So I'm mixed race. My mother is white British and my father is Black British. He has heritage from Jamaica and Nigeria. And, you know, over the years, different members of my family have struggled with different mental health issues, but I have had two Black family members who one who received psychiatric care and has passed away now, and another family member who is in psychiatric care at the moment. So it's a topic that I'm really passionate about, early intervention for mental health issues in general, but particularly with the Black community, because as you know, as I've mentioned, we are overrepresented in psychiatric care, and it's important to change that. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is an overview of what I will be talking to you about today. I'm going to be talking for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then there will be time for questions at the end. So I'm going to start by talking about mental health and the impact of the pandemic for a bit of context. Then I'll talk about barriers to accessing therapy for the Black community. I'll give some information about what therapy can help with and how you might know if you need it. I want to demystify what happens in therapy a bit, so I'll explain a bit about what tends to happen in therapy and what some of the benefits of therapy are. Want to give a little bit of information as well about the different types of therapy, so that if anybody is interested or talking to other people about therapy, they know the different kinds that are out there. And then coming towards the end, I'll give a bit of information about how to choose the right therapist. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a list of some of the impacts of the pandemic. They're not by any means the only impacts, but these are some of the things that I've been hearing more commonly about with my clients and also in the news as well. So social isolation has been a big issue for many people. A lot of people have felt like they've lost their freedom in many ways, and loneliness has been an issue. The struggle to adapt to being at home all of the time, or much of the time. Some people have, lost family members to COVID or for other reasons, and then they haven't been able to attend funerals face to face, which has been really difficult for a lot of people, and might have had a negative impact on their grief process. A lot of people have faced financial difficulties. They might not have been able to get to work, they might have been on furlough. There has been an increase in anxiety because of all the uncertainty created by the pandemic, and more people reporting low mood as well. And some people might be experiencing, a strong sense of anxiety or low mood where they've actually never experienced it before. It's really hard for them to know how to cope. There's been a lot in the news as well about couples separating, lots of relationship problems because people are spending a lot more time together than they usually would be. Increase in domestic violence, more pressure on women because women tend to get the brunt of childcare, and then they're trying to juggle that with work as well. And for a lot of people, they might have missed out on special occasions, things like being able to celebrate birthdays. People might have had to cancel their weddings, holidays have been cancelled. And I should add that these are not just, impacts to adults. A lot of these things will be impacting children and teenagers as well. And yeah, the loss of routine that we've all faced, not being able to get on with our normal schedule, difficulties with boundaries because we're doing everything at home now. And that's been difficult for some people who have ended up overworking and having problems with work addiction. That's become quite common. I've noticed that a lot with my clients. And then some people might be in situations that are overcrowded, so they're dealing with a loss of space and privacy. And as I mentioned earlier, there is evidence that BAME populations have been more adversely impacted in many ways because of structural inequalities. Next slide, please. So the Black community actually might be feeling quite vulnerable at this time because of the impact of the pandemic, but then also because some people have experienced racial trauma in connection to the focus, that's come upon race over the last year, and events around that. And some people have struggled because, a lot of workplaces are, they're releasing Black Lives Matter mission statements and people having to talk more openly about racism at work, which is good, but that might be really challenging for some people as well, and might, in some cases, expose people to more racism. So when I'm talking about racial trauma, what I'm referring to is physical and psychological symptoms in response to experiences of racism. And possible indicators that somebody is experiencing racial trauma could be any of these things listed here. So things like withdrawal from social connections or family, anger, rage, decreased trust in others, fear, might manifest in substance misuse for some people. Some people might be struggling with feelings of hopelessness or powerlessness, in the face of racism or other complicated feelings. Some people might have sleep disturbances, memory problems, disassociation, which is where we don't feel connected to ourselves and our body anymore. And some people do report psychosomatic responses as well, like aches and pains. And if racial trauma is ongoing, it can result in worse health overall. And I have noticed over the last year that I have had a lot more Black people coming to me for therapy, and a lot of it has been specifically about racial trauma. Next slide, please. Okay, so I thought it might be helpful to look at some of the barriers to accessing therapy in Black communities. These are my ideas based on my own sort of knowledge and life experience, so there might be other reasons as well. I'm not saying this is the definitive list, but I think some of the reasons might be as follows. So stigma, this could happen in any community where there's negative associations to mental health issues, and people worry about being judged or not being understood if they talk about mental health problems. Some people might have a distrust of mental health services, particularly people who, have seen family members in psychiatric care. They might be worried about accessing mental health support because psychiatric care can be coercive. So some people might be wanting to avoid getting, connecting with mental health at all in case they end up in the same situation. And some people might be worried about not getting appropriate support. They might be worried about speaking to people who don't understand Black issues and, things to do with racism or cultural issues. Some people might not actually understand, when therapy would be useful for them, or, what some of the benefits of therapy are. They might not know how to spot when they're struggling with their mental health. They might not have a good understanding of mental health issues. And some people as well might be put off because of financial barriers, because talking therapies, they can be expensive. Next slide, please. So this is a list of some of the things that therapy can help with. It's a brief list, definitely not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the common things that people might come to therapy for. So people might come to therapy for grief issues, especially if they don't feel like they're moving through the bereavement process. So if the grief process is going on for a really long time, or it feels complicated in some way, people come into therapy, if they feel like they have experienced some kind of discrimination, struggling with relationship problems, experiencing any kind of abuse, either in the past or currently. A lot of people who come into therapy are struggling with anxiety and low mood and want help with reducing those. But it's not necessary to be struggling with anxiety or low mood to access therapy. The main thing is that there's some kind of issue that you want to work on, and an area of your life where you want to bring about change. That's the sort of key thing. There isn't an issue that would be considered silly or too small or anything like that. Some people want help with work problems, or help managing emotions such as anger, for example. And as I say, it could be lots of other reasons, but those are some of the common ones. And it is important to access support before reaching crisis. And when I'm talking about crisis, I'm referring to risk, really. So, at the point where somebody can't really keep themselves safe anymore, and is just experiencing extremely high levels of distress. We don't want it to get to that point for anybody. It's better to seek help earlier on. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so I thought it might be helpful to give some information about the signs of anxiety and low mood, because some people might not know, and also it can be really difficult to spot these in ourselves as well. It is quite common that we might need other people to tell us when we're experiencing these things. So signs of anxiety would be things like feeling shaky, having stomach problems, feeling sick, having worries that just kind of keep going over and over them in our mind. We can't concentrate anymore. Some people have panic attacks where they can't breathe. And sometimes sleep is impacted because of anxiety. That's really common, and people might eat more or less. Some of the signs of low mood, common signs, would be things like not having motivation to do anything, disconnecting from friends and family. Again, sort of problems with sleep and eating, feeling angry. And some of these symptoms might be different in men and women as well. So often evidence has shown that men will tend to express low mood more through anger, whereas women might sort of internalize things more and withdraw a bit. So it's worth bearing that in mind. It is normal that we will all experience anxiety and low mood at different points of our life. It is normal, but it becomes more of a concern when the issues are, they're lasting a long time. They're going past a month, 6 weeks, and they're not sort of reducing. And it's also worth thinking about the severity of the symptoms as well. How much are they impacting the person? What are they stopping the person from doing? Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just a slide to explain a bit about what happens in therapy. So when most people are thinking about therapy, they believe that you're going to go to talk to somebody about your problems, which is right. That is definitely a big part of what happens. But there are some other things that might be happening in therapy as well. So part of what happens might be education about different life stages and processes, education about anxiety and low mood, for example. Part of it might be about experimenting with new thoughts and behaviours, learning coping strategies. And some therapists will give clients work to do in between sessions as well, because the idea is that you take things out of your therapy sessions so that they will have a real impact on your life. And all the while, you'll be building an awareness of yourself, which should make it easier to look after yourself and achieve your goals longer term. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, this is definitely not an exhaustive list of the benefits of therapy, but it's just a little bit of information about some of the benefits that people report, because it's going to depend on what people wanted to get out of therapy to begin with and what their goals are. So some of the benefits might be quite unique to that person, but some general benefits would be things like having better self-esteem and confidence, reduced anxiety and low mood, greater clarity about the issues we're facing and what we want to do, improved relationships with others. We might feel like we've moved on from some difficult experiences. We've got new perspectives on our life. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so I just thought I would give a bit of information about the different types of therapy, because there are some different types, and when you start looking at therapy, it can be quite confusing, and that's normal. So the main different types that you are going to come across are as follows. So psychotherapy, which is usually long-term and can be quite expensive as well. It's usually quite analytical, and the therapist is going to be looking back with you over your childhood to see how that's impacting you today. CBT, again, can be quite expensive, but it's usually more short-term, very structured and directive, and commonly used for anxiety and depression. And then there's counselling, which is normally led by the client's needs and tends to focus on current issues. So the client will come and decide what they want to talk about on that day, and it tends to be more short term. And all therapists should be giving what's called the core conditions. So they should be empathic, non-judgmental. They should be honest and genuine and challenging clients where necessary, and they should be able to listen really well. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of guidance about where to look for appropriate support, appropriate therapeutic support for Black people. So one really good resource is the Black and Asian Therapist Network directory, and I've put the website on there. So that's all Black and Asian therapists who are very capable of working with Black and Asian clients. And then there's also Culture Minds Therapy Directory, which is a new one. The therapists will be from all different kinds of backgrounds. Some of them may be white as well, but they do have to be trained to work in culturally competent ways. And then there's also Black Minds Matter, which is, they actually offer free counselling to Black people. So I would recommend, if anybody is interested in accessing free therapy with them, that they have a look at the website and see if they can sign up for updates about, because they have a long waiting list at the moment, I think. So it's worth signing up and seeing if you can get notification about when they have capacity again for new referrals. And there's some general websites that you could look at and then search with keywords. So search under keywords that, you know, are relevant to the kind of help you need. So there's the counselling directory, the BACP directory, and you can also receive free counselling through your GP, but there might be a waiting list and there's no guarantee that it would be culturally competent support. And do just bear in mind when looking for therapists as well that a lot of therapists have a sliding scale. So if you are, you know, looking at a directory or somebody's personal website, do look out for if they offer any reduced fees, and don't be afraid to ask therapists about that as well if you are speaking to them. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so it's really common that people don't know what questions to ask when they're looking for a therapist. So I've just put a couple of questions here that people may wish to ask therapists when they're getting in contact, because usually what would happen if you were interested in speaking to a particular therapist, they would usually offer you a consultation of about 15 to 30 minutes where you can ask them questions. And don't feel if you've done a consultation that you definitely have to work with that therapist. It's okay to have lots of different consultations, that's fine. If you decide that you're going ahead to work with a therapist, they will usually offer you an assessment at that stage. And the assessment is to find out more about your goals and needs, and just to double check that therapy is definitely suitable, because sometimes people do need other kinds of care. So some of the questions that it might be helpful to ask are things like, can you tell me about your approach, your style as a therapist? Can you tell me about your training, how long you've been working? If there's a particular topic you want to focus on, make sure they are comfortable discussing that. You could ask if they've got experience working with that, and how they've helped similar clients in the past. If you do need help with some kind of trauma connected to race, you can ask them how they've helped other people in that way. You can ask them about what progress in therapy would look like for you. Don't be afraid to ask really direct questions. Okay. Next slide, please. So coming towards the end now, this is the last slide. So I just thought it might be worth mentioning that most therapy is accessed online at the moment due to the pandemic. I think that this is a positive thing for the Black community, because it really opens out options in terms of which therapists you can work with. It increases your chances of getting a culturally competent therapist who is affordable for you. And a lot of therapists will go on to offer some kind of online support after the pandemic. I think this is going to become much more normalized, and it has been shown that online therapy can be just as helpful as face-to-face therapy, and some people find it really convenient. You can have more flexibility around your appointment times, and it's really good for people who might have difficulties leaving the house for some reason. Thank you. Next slide, please. So that does bring us to the end. So thank you for listening. If anybody does want to make any questions or comments, please go ahead.
Thanks, Nicola.
Thanks,
that was
Nicola.
really informative.
That was really, really good. We really enjoyed that. Well, I enjoyed that anyway, because I just think it's so important that as a Black community that we do realise that there is help out there for us, because what I've seen over the years, and I've had therapy myself, I've had the psychological therapy where they go back to your childhood, and I've had CBT as well, and I've done group therapy and I've done one-to-one. But I've never seen anybody like myself or coming from my culture. I've never encountered that. So like now, obviously, since the George Floyd murder and everything else, and obviously looking at the disparities of our community, that are in the mental health system and psychological therapies, I think it's really important that we do see people that look like us, because that alone just does so much for someone to feel so comfortable with someone, because that relation where you can relate to that person is vital I think anyway. So I think, like, even going forward for myself, I would most definitely go to a black therapist. So, and I just think it's so good that this is coming out there, and it's out there because there's so many of us that do need the help and support. So yeah,